Joined by former Vancouver Canuck TSN broadcaster, hockey analyst, Mr. Frank Corrado. Frankie, how are we doing today?
The Masters is underway. Couldn't be better.
Yeah, a fantastic weekend. Enjoy Easter to all the Corrados.
Thank you.
Over the long weekend. Want to pick up on a couple of things that we've been talking about this week. Some of it revolves around JT Miller. Some of it revolves around Rick Tocchet. But first, they've lost 4 in a row here, Frank. 5 games left. And Tocchet talked the other day about players checking out. How difficult is it to get up and bring your best for these games when you're playing out the string down the stretch and there's no playoffs?
It really depends on like who you are and what you've played for in the past. Okay, so when I go back to my year where Torts was the head coach, and I was kind of up and down. And towards the end of the year, I got brought back up. And I don't know if you remember, but they actually sat, like, everyone kind of took a turn sitting a game. It was like Garrison took a turn, Bieksa, and even Hamhuis. And it felt weird for me because it's like, those are veteran players, but I guess the emphasis at that point was, got to get this kid in the lineup and get him playing some games in the NHL. So for me, personally, at that moment, I had a lot to play for, and I had this stupid quote in the media, and I got made fun of for it afterwards. It was like, these games are like my Stanley Cup, which was the dumbest thing I've maybe ever said, and I probably deserve the ridicule for it. But that's honestly how I felt about it at the time because, man, you get an opportunity in the NHL, and you never want it to end. You want to make the most of it. So there are players in that room that are getting opportunities in the NHL thinking that right now because they kind of they understand the way the business works. Teams are going to sign players in the summer. You don't know if you're going to be in the mix. No one's going to pencil you in as far as next season. So you really need to have a strong finish. Now, little different scenario if you're a veteran player and you've been on teams that have maybe made playoff runs in the past and you've been through a grind of a career and you're sitting here, you're thinking, it's hard to find it every day. Like in that player, it would be hard to find motivation and say, like, what am I doing? Like, what am I really looking forward to here? I'm just playing out the end of the regular season. Ideally, someone like that is probably thinking, I just want to go into the summer feeling healthy and good and get this thing over with because it's been a long, trying year with a lot of emotion swings and all that kind of stuff. So, it really depends, but you kind of see the differences between the guys that are coming up from the minors or the guys that are signing out of college. They have a ton to play for right now. And the guys who have been through it, it's like, man, you're just kind of counting the days and you're saying, like, let's get this over with.
Does it matter when you got eliminated from the play, or not eliminated because that takes a long time mathematically, but when you realize you're out of it? Like teams that have a horrific start and are out of it on December the 5th, they might go through that sulky flat period in the middle of the season, and then they might get bored of being that and might actually finish strong. Like, I think it kind of matters, doesn't it? Like when you realize you're out of it.
I do believe that, yeah. And for this team, like Tocchet coming in was like a little bit of a rejuvenation for the team.
Right.
And now you're going through that lull. And to your point, it's like, if you knew by Christmas you were out of it, there's a stretch there in the dog days of the year leading up to the All-Star break where it's miserable going to the rink. You're losing. You're racking up minuses. It's like, that's tough. And then it's almost like you get to this point, and I kind of experienced this in Toronto when we had that year we finished in last place where we kind of stole some games off people late in the year because we were just playing this like loose, relaxed, free kind of game, which felt really weird. But can't remember if I've said it on this show or not, but like we went into Philly, they had playoff implications. We were the worst team by far in the NHL. We won that game 4-1, and we were like in the dressing room after saying, I can't believe they lost to us. Like, I can't believe it. Like, that was not because we were so bad, but because they had a lot to play for. And we were sitting there like, we just went out there and played. We were loose. We were fast. We had fun. And it was
Calgary and Chicago the other night.
I was going to say the Blackhawks might have been saying the exact same thing Tuesday night after beating Calgary.
There's something to be said for that. Obviously, there's no longevity there. Like, you're not going to string together 8 in a row and say, like, that's the case. But, you can kind of sneak up on a team. For Vancouver with everything that's happened, man, go back to the start of the year. And think about where this team was and blowing leads every single night, losing games, long stretches, all the noise around this team. And then you're like, wait, that feels like it was not that long ago. These guys have been through a lot in a short period of time. So it is understandable that there would be this lull right now. But going back to one of the conversations we had on this show, and it was about like things this year maybe carrying over to next year, and maybe not so much on the ice, but as far as like culture goes and what Tocchet wants to establish as like, these are the standards, regardless of what position we're going to be in the standings or how our play maybe be on the ice. Like there's a certain set of standards that we need to establish here and adhere to regardless, because that's how you build a culture. It's arbitrary stuff. It really is. But internally, it has to mean something for your team. And I can understand if he would be frustrated at the situation. You know, he lost, 4 in a row? And yeah, there's nothing to play for. But it's like, if he's trying to build something, like that kind of foundation starts now.
Yeah. Yeah, and went quietly into the night in the third period in a 1-goal game against LA at home on Sunday, and then had a 2-goal lead against Seattle and blew it and watched a multi-goal loss to a division rival or would-be rival. Frankie, I have to ask the follow-up, and I have a feeling it might be your fellow right shot defenseman, but who chirped you about that? These are my Stanley Cup games
God.
From the Canucks
I showed
in 2014. Or is it a shorter list to say who didn't
it would probably
chirp
be
you?
a shorter list to say who didn't. And like I showed up to the rink the next day, and you remember when I can't remember which beer company it was. They were doing like they would sell a 2-4, and they had those mini Stanley Cups in them. Like I showed up to the rink the next day, and there was one of those sitting in my stall, and I looked like I was so embarrassed. And I don't know who put it there, but yeah, it was.
I thought players didn't listen to the media, Frankie.
Come on.
What happened there? It's somehow...
I didn't. Maybe someone else must have. I don't know who, but yeah.
Wow. So here's what I'll say. If it wasn't Kevin Bieksa, it was at the direction of Kevin Bieksa. I would have to say.
It was, I hope it was in good fun. I think it was in good fun. Yeah.
Yes, I'm sure. At the end of the season, that's all you've got.
I'm pretty
Exactly.
sure that's all you have at that point. And listen, it's a stupid quote anyways, but it's one of those ones like Sheldon Keefe last year when he said, there was a little more respect in the handshake line. It's one of those ones, as soon as you're saying it, you're like, oh no, why did I say that? Why did I say that?
Yeah.
Even though you can sort of understand what he's meaning,
yes,
you can't actually.
No. And I'm sure it was accurate. Yeah. I'm sure it was accurate as well.
So you just light bulb just went off in my head. We played Colorado the day after that quote, and I can't remember. It was one of those guys, McGinn or someone like that, on the ice. He's like, how's your Stanley Cup or something like that? And I'm like, is this actually like bulletin board material for you guys? Like, I know we don't have anything to play for, but you have less to play for if you're thinking of that and you've read that and that is what you talked about on the ice.
Right. Exactly. Frankie, the emotional outburst guy on the team, and Blake and I discussed it yesterday, and for me in a group of 20, there ought to be somebody who gives a shit and who is going to pop off because he gives a shit so much from time to time. But emotional outbursts like JT Miller, I'm sure you saw, just goes down the hallway and into the room with 30 seconds left after missing that breakaway in the second period. Helpful or hurtful?
I mean, you kind of have to think about the volume at which he does it. Like at this point, it's probably hurtful, right? Like if you're a really good team and there's a certain expectation and a high standard and maybe things aren't meeting that standard and you throw a big outburst, that's kind of helpful. Like that I think has some cachet, some sway with the guys, and it kind of gets some people's attention. If it's just a bad year and it's something that's been happening over and over again, it loses its it loses its ability to kind of get a rise out of people in a positive way. Like, look at it this way. If you're just always operating at that 9 or 10 out of 10 and throwing tantrums and kind of going nuts, it's just like you almost get desensitized to it. But if you're a guy like you operate, like on the ice, I'm talking off the ice. Like if you just operate at like a 7 out of 10 intensity, right? Like that's a good place to be. From time to time, though, you have like a 10 out of 10 moment. It's like, okay, hey, he's pissed off, like, and he's right, like we gotta. But if it's one of those things where it's just constantly happening, it's not helpful. And going back to like it being a frustrating year and all that kind of stuff, body language is pretty important. Like as much as people say things and do things, a lot of the times people remember how you make them feel. And if you're around them and they make you feel like you got to like shrivel up and walk on eggshells just because you're in a bad mood, that's not a good place to be. But if you kind of like, if you have this aura about you where, you kind of conduct yourself in a professional way and, you have a high standard and you're pretty intense, but you don't make people feel like they got to like go into a shell around you because you could snap at any moment. That's better. And then when you do have that moment, it's not hurtful. Like Jacob Markstrom, like when we played in Utica together, he was fiery. Like he really was, but he almost like saved it for the right time. Like it was genuine. It wasn't forced. And there's a difference there because we're in like the Calder Cup playoffs in the finals against Manchester. We lose the first 2 games, I believe, in overtime. I can't remember if it was first 2. One of those games was in overtime, but we ended up losing 2 on the road. And he came back in after the second game and absolutely yard sailed stuff, like broke sticks. And we're like, that makes sense. Like we're in the Calder Cup finals. We need to steal one on the road. We lost a close game or 2 close games. Like, okay, that makes sense to me. But I mean, as far as the other stuff, if it's just like you're kind of throwing a stick or throwing a tantrum because you didn't score your whatever goal of the season, I don't know, spare me with it. Like there's more to it than that.
Off days. Oh, go ahead, Blake.
I was just going to say the Canucks are debuting a new young right shot defenseman tonight, a 21-year-old out of Ohio State University. And I don't need a scouting report because I don't think you've seen probably too much of Cole McWard, but he's a younger guy. We've seen the 4-year collegiate guys come in, and when you're 23, 24, I think you can maybe grasp a little bit more the moment and that you don't need to win the Stanley Cup in one day, per Frank Corrado. What's young Cole McWard thinking, though, at 21? And I don't think I don't even know that Cole McWard, when he decided that he was going to leaving university, probably expected that he would touch NHL ice this year.
The best advice you could give a guy like that is what Rick Bowness said to me before my first game. Play your game and have fun and don't think about anything. Just like he kind of just came up to me in morning skate and that's what he said. And he's like, you're going to make mistakes. Who cares? Just get right back out there and have fun. You only get to do it once. And it is interesting, though, for a 21-year-old coming out of college, because usually we think of 23, 24, guys that are a little more seasoned, a little more ready. So for him, if you're going to leave if you're going to leave some college on the back burner, it's important to make sure that you are ready. And because I've seen it too many times where guys come out of college, they think they're ready, they're leaving early, they get the offer for the entry level. It's very, tempting to take that offer. And then you're in the minors and it's like you're trying to get back up and you're not getting there. And then they sign someone else. And then there's a guy from junior coming up and you kind of get lost in the shuffle. So before
the good news for him, Frank, there's no one else in the pipeline.
That's the great thing. And they're going NCAA. Like, it seems like they're going NCAA free agent heavy right now because you're right. It's like, I don't know. Has anyone been drafted of any kind of significance in the last little while that you've said is going to be, part of the solution here? So I actually think they have to go to that NCAA free agent pool right now. But for that kid, man, whatever you did this year, you ride that momentum, you ride that wave, and you have fun because you only get to experience it once.
Frank, do you know who the last right shot defenseman drafted by the Vancouver Canucks to play NHL games is?
Was Jalen Chatfield drafted or was he a free agent?
He was a college
OHL free
agent. A major junior free agent out of the Windsor Spitfires.
All right, let's hear it.
Mistaken.
That's right.
No
Frank Corrado.
way.
The last drafted right shot defenseman.
The 150th pick in the 2011 draft from the Sudbury Wolves. Frank Corrado is the last right shot defenseman to play an NHL game.
You remember when Pierre Maguire was interviewing Phil Kessel? And you remember, he asked, how's your breath? And Phil Kessel said, it's not good, eh? That's how I feel about that. It's not good, eh? That's how I feel about that.
Tocchet was bemoaning the lack of off-day preparation and threatened to babysit a little more, Frankie. Tell us about off-day preparation. When coach gives you an off day before game day, what should that mean for an NHL
I mean,
pro?
it should mean you do something. Like, go for a walk. Go, like, I used to rip around Yaletown and just go to, like, Cafe Artigiano, grab a coffee, sit on, like, we used to call it Hot Corner. I can't remember what.
Oh, wow.
It's like everything's happening at Hot Corner, man. There's just everyone's walking around. There's a lot of people watching. You sit there with the coffee. I'd sit there with my buddy Slav, rest in peace. We'd have a coffee, go for lunch. Like, I don't know. It's you just have to do something. You don't need to like get in a pool and start doing water aerobics or like get in a gym. You need to just like check out for a day mentally and just do something that day that keeps you somewhat active. But yeah, that's the challenge with a younger team, right? Like older teams, it feels like guys are really good at, yeah, they can shut off, but they get right back into it. And it feels like they're a little more grizzled that way. For younger teams, it's like, okay, when you check back, like you check out, it can't be hard to check back in. Like there needs to be a little urgency as far as understanding that, okay, coach threw you a bone here with a day off. Now you got to like repay the favor. There's a little old schoolness that's lost in this, okay? The old school guys, life on the road, they would go out and they would play the next day, let's say a little bit guilty, right? Now that happens much fewer and further between in today's day. But those are the guys that when coach threw them a bone, it was like the chatter in the room was like, there's no messing around today. Like coach threw us a bone. Like if we want that again, like let's be ready to go right off the hop. And everyone kind of understood that. So there's a little bit of old schoolness that's been lost on this younger generation. And I say that as a 30-year-old, like I'm old.
Yes, a week into his 30s, Blake. Listen to the wisdom emanating from
Have you
Sir
figured out what a
Francis
bad start is? Like, why does a team come out flat? Like we see this in big games too. Like what is that affliction where you need to be there and you show up and all of a sudden and you're on your heels from the get-go? Why does it happen?
So there's a couple things I can think of. Sometimes people make so much of the moment, like it's so big. This is a big game. We need this, we need that, and it's like, whew, like I'm already mentally drained before I go into the game when I think about that. When you talk about the magnitude of it. Also, there's just like a human element where it's like, you guys lived in Vancouver long enough. You know it rains every day. And you wake up some days, you're like, I've got a splitting headache and I'm tired. And
Brain's
it's like,
foggy.
it's like I'm in a little bit of a brain fog. I said like 2 dumb things this morning already. Like I got to snap out of it. And then you're like, next thing you know, it's like, I have the most important game of the year tonight. But I always come back to this. Like when you're on the ice, all that kind of stuff, no one cares about that stuff. You're a performer on the ice. There's a certain level that you need to hold yourself to. You can't kind of use that as a crutch. But yeah, I mean, just it's human nature, really.
Do smelling salts work for
I
it?
use the smelling salts a little bit. It just more like smelled weird than anything. It wasn't like I was all of a sudden into the game. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, I got one more question for you, but Frankie, I'm sure you'll miss the 100 mils of rain that are coming this weekend here in Vancouver. It's that time of year, sadly. Calgary got the win. You mentioned your boy Bonus earlier in the interview. Calgary got the win last night to pull even with Winnipeg on points. Jets have a game in hand. Who do you like between these two Canadian teams for the final spot in the West?
I do like Winnipeg more just because I think they have more in their lineup. Like I think their scorers can make a difference. The goaltending matchup should be a wash. Calgary plays a little better defensively than Winnipeg does. Jacob Markstrom is like the X factor right now. Like he's one of those guys where you talk about Vasilevsky, Shesterkin, Sorokin. It's like Markstrom should be in that conversation. Saros, like he should be in there every year. He hasn't been this year, but if the top 6 in Winnipeg actually plays to their capability and the way they can, they should be like that should be the team. But they're in this situation. Like Winnipeg's in this situation because those guys, that top 6, more the top 4 or 5, I guess. They're in this situation because those guys have not played well for basically since Valentine's Day on. So it's up to them to figure it out and lead the way.
Marvelous stuff, Frank. Thanks for this. Have a great week. Catch up on those CHL playoffs next week. Appreciate this.
Thanks for the stats. I appreciate that.
The last right shot defenseman drafted by the Canucks. to play an NHL game,
Not
Mr.
the best.
Frank Corrado.